Okay, hello. Welcome back to A Drunk History of Middle-earth. You're with Chris, your host, and I'm not with Becca today. I'm with a guest, Kaiakayy. Hello, Kaiakayy. How are you doing?
How are you?
I'm good. Am I saying that right? Is it Kaiakayy? Kaiakayy?
Hi, you got it right.
Okay, phew, I thought so. It's like there's that episode of Family Guy where Mayor West says, I feel it on the wind. And someone's like, do you mean the wind? He says, I've only ever seen that written down. So, yes, you may know my guest. A lot of you probably do, because we were just talking before we started recording about how tight the Polish Tolkien community is. But in general, the Tolkien kind of worldwide community is pretty tight. So we probably roll in a lot of the same circles. So you'll have seen Kaiakayy on social media. She makes some very interesting, informative videos. And I've seen you've been advertising some pretty cool merch, which it looks pretty interesting. But that's for you to do. So, Kaiakayy, do you want to say hello? Tell people a little bit about yourself?
Hello. So I am Kaiakayy. You could find me on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, and now Blue Sky. Now that I've got off Twitter and everyone's migrating over to Blue Sky. I mainly make I started off with the did you know type videos where I would watch the Lord of the Rings movies and then pause it, say something like, did you know X, Y, and Z from the book? That's the difference from the movie. And then I've moved on to doing more lore videos, and now I post a lot about my giant Lord of the Rings collection. That also includes a lot of the merch that I have, like you said. So my content's kind of all over the place.
Do you know what's really interesting about your collection is that I don't know if any of you know this, but you all seem to have the same bookcases. And did everybody who does like Lord of the Rings content one day just get together and say, right, we're going to get these particular fucking shelves? Because every video I see, it's like a slow pan. I'm like, I've seen this before. Oh, wait, no, I haven't. Oh, wait, yeah, I have. Oh, wait, no, I haven't.
It's because Target and IKEA have this, mainly IKEA has this line of bookshelves called the Billy bookshelves, and they are the perfect size, like perfect height, perfect shelf depth, like perfect amount of shelves, and they come in like the regular tall height ones, they come in the short ones, and they come in the corner ones, which a lot of the book talk users use. So that way they have the whole like wall of books, but a lot of us use those because they're cheap and they look great and they're so sturdy, because all of my books are so heavy and I have yet to need to replace a shelf.
I cannot believe I made that as what I thought was a throwaway joke, and you've just dropped the forbidden bookshelf law. I did not expect an actual answer there, but my God, am I glad I said that. Because you're right, like once you said Billy Bookcase, I was like, oh shit, yeah, like, because I used to be part of this server called the Fellowship of the Readers, and and if you did a Control F in that server for Billy, there is not a single fucking person in that server who's ever been called Billy, but the Billy Bookcase gets talked about a lot.
Yeah,
I
and
can't,
IKEA,
okay, wow.
yeah, and IKEA picked up on that shit because the bookcases themselves used to be like $45 to $85, and now one singular goddamn bookcase is $116.
That's horrible.
It is.
You ruined it. I get my bookshelves off Facebook Marketplace, so I might have a Billy bookshelf. I don't know, but yeah. So we're gonna talk about some stuff today. Now, I always struggle to think of how to describe the episode because when you're watching it, listening to it, you've already clicked on it. You saw the fucking title, so you know what you're listening to. But you're from Florida, right? Is that where you live?
Sure.
Yeah, good. Oh, good. So you'll be used to eldritch horrors walking the streets and
I sure am.
drinking water that turns you mad.
Absolutely.
So that's a little bit of a hint to what we're talking about today, because we're going to revisit, for listeners of the podcast, we're going to revisit Ungoliant. Now, however, we're not going to talk about Ungoliant in like who she is, what she does. We've already covered that. That was interesting enough. Instead, we're going to talk about a very, very interesting topic that both Kaiakayy and I were fascinated to research. We're going to talk about Ungoliant and Shelob and some of the other women in Middle-earth, because there is one particular paper we looked at that talks about feminism within Tolkien, but it also very closely matches a theme that Kai has been on recently, which is Ungoliant as a feminist icon. So we're going to have a look at that today. We're going to look over the paper. We're going to discuss some of the more potent passages that Ungoliant and Shelob are present in. We're going to have a look at what some people's views on Tolkien and feminism, or Tolkien and misogyny, or Tolkien and sexism. But we're going to have a bit of a mishmash of all that. So it's going to be more of a discussion episode. It's an examination. And if you listen to the podcast for a long time, you will be reminded of the episode we did with Alex Pointy. Oh God, it must have been about a year ago now. Because what happened is, me and Becca did a series on the Noldor elves, and then we finished that off by talking to Alex about whether Feanor was a complete bastard or not. I still think he is. Where do you fall on Feanor, by the way, Kaya?
So for a while, obviously I'm like a stan for the people who do chaotic things in Tolkien, but I was very much on the, Feanor did nothing wrong type thing just because chaos. But Silmarillion, I don't know if y'all know who she is, but she is another Tolkien creator who is so fucking smart. I don't know how her memory is the way it is, but she remembers so much. But she put me onto this way of thinking of like, what he did is inexcusable, but she understands it because of what his father did with, like, how he married Indus, and with the way that elven relationships work is that when you're married, like, that is your partner, and so long as the other elf is still alive, you cannot remarry, you can't find another love, you can't do any of that. So then whenever Miriel and Finwë married Indus, that meant Miriel couldn't come back. Not only did Finwë take away Feanor's chance to ever see his mother again, but so did what the hell was her name again? I just forgot her name. But so
Indus.
Yeah, Indus. So did Indus. And, like, the result of that being his half brothers, and so that obviously created what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say hatred, but like a very strong dislike. And you can very much pick up on that, even though he never straight up says, like, I hate you. But like whenever his brother does call him by the full brother and Feanor calls him half brother, you're like, oh, shit, okay.
It's so interesting you mentioned that, because Feanor comes up later in this episode, because the divorce is quite a poignant example of how, for lack of a better, just going to put this out there. I trust my audience quite a lot. I trust the listeners. And again, if you want to come and hang out with me, come and join the Discord. But you need to understand that I'm going to talk about other people's views. And if it's my own view, I'll say. But otherwise, I am talking about someone else's views. Because viewing Feanor as a child of divorce, or as a mother who refused to come back to life, which is another way of looking at it. She had the chance, didn't want to come back. That was viewed as a woman going outside of her intended role and wrecking other people's lives because of it. So in this paper as well, actually, I'm sure you picked up on it as well, there seems to be a lot of the lens that women are to blame for evil when the women step outside of what they were intended to do. And I think Miriel is a really good example of that lens of viewing, because... But then, interestingly, you've straight away put it back onto you put the shoe on the other foot by saying it was Finwë who robbed her of the chance of coming back by marrying Indus. But then it could also be looked at that Miriel refusing to come back to life was the reason that Finwë wanted to marry Indus in the first place. It's a fascinating. This is why I've been so excited to talk about it. It is a very fascinating subject.
Yeah, and like, in my mind, the way that I see it is that that's really the first almost act of feminism that we see in Tolkien, because even after she did die and Finwë was like, well, I want a lover, I want to have more children, everyone was begging her to come back, like, yo, he's whining, he's about to do something that no one has ever done, we don't know what the consequences are going to be, you have to come back and quell his tantrum. And she's like, fucking no, like, I just gave him this amazing son and he can't let me fucking rest. give me a break. He will be fine. And he could have easily
Yeah.
had been fine had he put his energy into raising his child, but no, he was like, fuck this first kid. I'm gonna go and marry this lady and have two more.
Yeah, I mean, any woman or any parent, I would venture to say, can understand that. Just fucking let me rest, please. Just
Yeah.
that kid has took everything out of me. Please, just let me rest.
That's
Yeah,
exactly what Feanor did. He took everything out of her, and Finwë still wanted more from her.
yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you call it the first act of feminism because the Yavanna is seen as kind of like the Gaia type figure, right? She's like Mother Nature, she's like Mother Earth. That was my British showing through. I said Earth with an F. Earth, Mother Earth. She's Mother Earth, and she produces the two trees and a lot of the life and the light given. And that's just femininity. That's not feminism. So it's very interesting that you do say that Miriel choosing not to come back was the first act of feminism. And like all good acts of feminism, it got people talking long and hard and looking at things about what the fuck do we do? Which, for anyone who's wanting to do a bit more research on what we're talking about, if you would go and read the statute of Finwë and Miriel? Am I thinking of that the right one? It is, yeah. It's not laws and customs among the Eldar. That spells out marriage. We're talking about divorce, which I think is the statute of Finwë and Miriel. But yeah, go and read that. It's absolutely fascinating. In fact, I would say it's up there with the Athrobeth, Finrod, Andreth in terms of dense Tolkien lore. The jaw drops per sentence are about equal with those two works, I think. It's just like, oh shit, how much work went into trying to justify divorce? To spelling out just how hard it should be to get a divorce within Tolkien's work. Which brings us on to a very interesting point. So, what we need to get out of the way here is that when we're going to talk about Tolkien's views of sex, of gender, of biology, of femininity, masculinity, etc., we need to remember that the man himself, said that Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth is a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. So that is who that guy was. And Kaya, you mentioned just before we started recording, like this guy, we'd consider him super Catholic now, but for his time was about as liberal as you could get while still being like a quote-unquote regular person, right?
Yeah.
Like, this guy was just... Yeah. So, if you are going to come into this episode and hold him up to today's standards of what we view of even just the discourse around sex and gender and what have you, it's never going to stand up. Never. Because he's a product of his time. So just bear that in mind. But I want to acknowledge our main source for today. There's a couple of other things that I'll call in. But there is a paper that we read, a fascinating paper by a guy called Christopher Hansen. Not the same guy from To Catch a Predator, I don't think, unless if it was, he's very, very well-rounded, and you wouldn't think that he was doing... Maybe he was writing this paper in between catching pedos, who knows? But it is called Crossroads. Sorry, it was published in a journal called Crossroads, a journal of English studies, and this was in 2021. And the main premise of this paper is he looks at Shelob and Ungoliant as femininity and sexuality outside of Tolkien's rigid worldview, and how pretty much only bad things can ever come from a woman stepping outside the bounds of what she's quote-unquote meant to do. Would you say that was a fair assessment of the paper?
I would say so, yeah.
It's I mean, I don't know about you, but we'll get into it. But it felt like he was a bit heavy-handed. And there's a certain part of the paper where he starts slagging off Galadriel, and I was like, you fucking lost me now, pal.
Yeah,
yeah, because you'd messaged me, didn't you? And you were like, I like this paper. I don't agree with everything that's said. And I was like, yeah, but it's good that it's good that someone's talking about it. But there was a certain part where I was like, nah, you've lost me here, mate. Like,
like the first, I want to say like the first half of it, I was just like, oh my God, this is great. I agree with a lot of this. And then it got to like the last half of it, and I was like, okay, you're stretching here, buddy.
That was it. Yeah, it's stretching, wasn't it? So like, and this is what was really interesting is that he makes the case that Shelob and Ungoliant are monstrous because of how they reproduce and the nature of how this reproduction comes about. And he says that in Tolkien's writings, Ungoliant and Shelob are depicted as monstrous and evil and what have you because they're completely unsubservient to men, and they are. I can't remember what the word was, but it's kind of like irredeemable. They're not able to be placed back under the control of like a patriarchal system, which makes them the fallen, monstrous women. Which, well, actually, does it contrast heavily to Ungoliant as a feminine symbol, or does it complement it? I mean, I'll leave that one to you because you've done some. You've talked a bit about this on your social medias, haven't you?
Yeah, so for me, in my opinion of it, I think that complements her because Ungoliant and Shelob are really especially when it comes to how they reproduced and the fact that they choose to not have a mate, whereas literally just about everyone else in Tolkien's legendarium has one, and they have almost like this wholesome. I don't want to say like family dynamic, but like almost like their own American dream via Tolkien. And like Shelob and Ungoliant don't, and I think that's just great.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like he was. I read the term unbridled sexual intercourse, and I was like, I'm sorry, what's bad about this? Like, why are Shelob and Ungoliant meant to be bad? Like, when you talk, like, it's because so the non-monogamy of Ungoliant and Shelob, and obviously we see from the legendarium that the brood. So when Ungoliant moves in, like she just bought the fucking house. When Ungoliant gets to Ered Gorgoroth, and well, she lives in Nandun Gortheb, and she mates with the spider monsters that were already there, then devours them, has a brood, an evil brood, equal or greater than Shelob, perhaps, and then eventually maybe moves down south and devours herself in a hunger. But again, go listen to the Ungoliant episode for that. But it's the fact that she has many mates. 2, she is more powerful than the mates. 3, she has many children, and that's what makes her this monstrous figure. Is this unbridled, unrestricted sexuality where she's completely unsubservient to men? I mean, yeah. So if that's what the way Tolkien was writing her, is like this is a consequence of going outside of the natural order as a woman, it's a pretty fucking badass one, because I mean, you've pointed out yourself previously, and it's in the Silmarillion, the published Silmarillion. Morgoth was scared of her, like he was terrified of her. The Balrogs had to come and fucking save him.
Yeah, so and I really think that I think that Tolkien did mean to describe her monstrous in that way, but not because he viewed it that way, or maybe he did. Obviously, we can't ask him. But I think it was also because of the culture that was going around at that time, that everyone else would view women in that way. Like, even if like a woman were to have a child out of wedlock, they would send her away and you would never see her again. Either that or you'd never see the kid again, and then she would come back with no kid.
Oh, yeah. Like, so are you familiar in the US with, so this was in Ireland all the way up until the 90s, by the way, the Magdalene laundries?
Yes.
Where unmarried mothers would go. That was fucking horrible.
Yeah, and then I remember hearing of one of those where they had found it, and there was just like this, not hidden, but unmarked graveyard of just children.
Yeah, it was wild. It was horrible up until like the night, and that was Catholicism at work. Like, yeah, it's crazy. But this paper so goes into the examination, and one thing that I'd never picked up on myself that the paper mentions is how Ungoliant is set as a direct opposite to Yavanna. I'd never ever considered that. I mean, what about yourself? Like,
oh no, 100% I have, but that's because like I like to do the deep dives into the women in Tolkien. But yeah, I would say that she is an absolute direct opposite of Yavanna, or even I used to think Varda, but I mean, really the only thing, I don't want to say the only thing Varda did was create, stars and light and whatnot. But Yavanna really went in hard in creating everything from Middle Earth, whereas Ungoliant would just devour it all if she could.
Yeah, I mean, I just had this really funny thought. Like, could you imagine if Manwë and Varda were listening to this episode? Could you imagine the face she would have pulled then if you'd said the only thing she did was the stars? Like, is that not fucking good enough, Kaya?
I know, that's why I had to preface myself like, just in case she's listening.
We know you're big fans up there in Taniquetle. Yeah, they get Spotify up there in Taniquetle. Could you imagine, like, that? And the thing is, like, you'd know from looking at your part, like, the looks you give your partner as well, is everyone would know that exact look. It was like, is she for fucking real?
Like, is
Just the
this
start.
bitch fucking joking right now?
Do you not like the Big Dipper, dick? But
Oh,
yeah,
I'm
so
sorry, was Palladius not good enough for you?
yeah, exactly. To put more into that point is that for the male among us, might be a male thing, might just be a Chris not thinking about things enough thing. Who knows? That Yavanna is set directly as the opposite to Ungoliant because, as Kaya mentioned, Yavanna is like this Mother Earth, this Gaia figure. She, all living things, the birds, the beasts, the trees, blah blah blah, that aren't the children of Iluvatar tend to come from Yavanna broadly. But then it goes even further with that, in that Yavanna is very monogamous and wedded to a male to whom she is subservient. And that is demonstrated, and this is funny because I distinctly remember when I've covered this on the podcast previously about Yavanna and Aule's marriage, I do say it's the most married thing ever when they're having a discussion where Yavanna says, your creations, i.e. the dwarves, will destroy my trees. And I said it, and I remember in the episode saying, it's the most married thing ever to end a conversation by saying, nevertheless, they will need wood. And he goes back to whatever the fuck he was doing, right?
Yep.
But that is then taken as that's even more of that. Yavanna, despite being one of the Aratar and one of the most powerful beings within Ea itself, is still subservient to her husband and still exists within a quote unquote like a proper structure of monogamy and femininity. Whereas Ungoliant is just completely unbridled in every aspect, unbridled lust, unbridled hunger, just. Well, then we take the biggest example, of course. Yavanna is responsible, along with Nienna. Yavanna is responsible for raising the two trees. Ungoliant destroys them. It's just like that was a big a big head exploding moment for me when I was reading this. I was like, oh shit!
Yeah.
I love and just as an aside, I love this about Tolkien's legendarium is that. Even things I read where I end up disagreeing with them, to even look through someone else's lens to view things in a way you've never ever considered before, it adds a whole new. It's like umami of Tolkien, isn't it? Just makes everything just taste that much better. You're like, holy fuck! There's so many different ways of looking at this.
Yeah, because I had never seen, I mean, personally, I had never seen Yavanna as like subservient, I guess, to Aule, because even after they had that conversation of like, well, your dwarves are going to destroy my trees, and he's like, yeah, well, but then she goes to Manwë and was like, hey, I worked so fucking hard. Can I not have one thing? And Manwë was like, well, if you were to have one thing, what would it be? And she created the ends. Well, through Manwë, she created the ends. So I think that is maybe another form of self-feminism, because at that point she's just like, well, fuck my husband, I'm going to take care of what I created first. Because even though the dwarves are going to need wood and all the other children of Aule are going to need wood, there's going to be a protector of the forest being like, hey, slow down there, buddy. You can't have all of it. You need to pace yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Like again, it's these acts of feminism within are still a male dominated, because she still had to go. She went to Manwë, but ultimately, if if we were to look at it from a family simplistic point of view, she went to her big brother, who then went to their dad, because Manwë conversed with Eru, didn't he? He's like, because I'm pretty sure he looked inside himself and heard the voice of Eru, and then said, "We'll call down more spirits, and they'll go into like the eagles and the ents and what have you." Well, the eagles and ents, whether they're spirits or whatever, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But in the published Silmarillion, that's pretty much the order of events. He looks inside himself, hears the voice of Eru, and he's like, "Oh yeah, okay, there's the answer." Yeah, it's fascinating. Like, again, I don't want to be seen as just arguing for the sake of it, but feminism, and I think that's where, if we were to take this Chris Hansen's, if we took a seat, Chris, if we took Chris Hansen's view of things, that it would be quote unquote proper feminism, because it was still done within the acceptable confines of a man is still the ultimate authority, which should be, yeah. Which then still puts Ungoliant on top in terms of fuck you, fuck this, I'll do what I want kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Because I don't think it was a mistake that Tolkien basically implied that Melkor was the most powerful of all the Valar when he was a Valar. And Ungoliant was able to, wound him so badly that the mountains still echo his crying.
Oh, Lamoth, yeah. That's so fucking cool, though. Like, so I have this theory that Tolkien wrote female characters better or worse, depending on whether he'd had an argument with Edith that day.
I love that. I love that idea.
Is, so, like, Ungoliant wounding Morgoth, like, she fought the devil and won, and he was only saved because of his Balrogs. Like, Edith must have been on a really good day that day. Then Queen Beruthiel, absolute bastard, gets put on a ship and sent away. Edith was perhaps being a bit of a twat that day.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
he was writing down what he wished he could do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, can you imagine? Like, it's just he's had the best week of his life, and he's like, right, I'm going to get the tale of Beren and Luthien down. Just that's it. And then a bad day, you get Queen Beruthiel. A shit day, absolutely, you get Taran Calamay. Like, like that's my theory. So that might be why they had a really good marriage, because we don't have that many evil women in Tolkien. But
I've never thought of it like that. I love that.
That's just absolute shit theory, but it does make me laugh to think that she's like, he just storms upstairs after an argument. She's like, "Don't you fucking kill off Luthien."
Oh god, now you got me thinking that, like, whenever he did write like Queen Beruthiel as Edith, like maybe her cats were the kids just listening in on the shit he was getting up to and then reporting it back to her. And he was like, "Fuck you and your cats, you're all getting on a boat."
You've got soot on your nose. Jonald, you've been with the Inklings again. It's a shame that Jonald wasn't his real first name, but it's a perfect one. Jonald Rolkin Tolkien. Anyway, my shit ones aside, I did mention Queen Beruthiel there, because this paper also states, so we're talking about evil women in Tolkien broadly, evil feminine. There are also some examples. So the author states that I think Ungoliant and Shelob are the only two outright evil women within Tolkien, but there are a couple of, if not ambivalent, then fallen, like bit of a bastard type ones. Is that vampire called Thurin Gwethil? Is that in the First Age?
Yeah.
Thurin Gwethil. So that's not mentioned anywhere in here, so I've pulled one over on the author there. Right. Thurin Gwethil isn't mentioned, so she is probably evil. Let's put that one out there. So there's Shelob and Ungoliant. But he does mention that in terms of fallen women, there's Queen Beruthiel of Gondor, and as we've discussed, she, I think it was around the year 900 of the Third Age, she was the Queen of Gondor. She had several cats who spied on people of Gondor, and then she had a cat who spied on the other cats, and she tortured these cats. And
yeah, she actually hated cats.
Yeah, she hated cats, but the cats, because she tortured them, I imagine it's some kind of Stockholm syndrome, Athelian syndrome in world, I guess. Eventually, her husband got fucking sick of her and stuck her on a ship with the cats, and they were last seen going past Dunbar, I think, is how the story goes. That's it's a weird little one, but her name's remembered all the way up to Aragorn's time, because I think he talks about her at some point within the, like 2,000 years later. Then
Yeah.
there is... Sorry, go on.
Oh no, I was about to say, I think he mentions her in like Two Towers or something.
Yeah, which is... It's quite an obscure little one, considering that her husband did the best to wipe her from the histories, but she still survived by word of mouth.
Women
Crazy.
prevail.
Yep. Let's not... I don't know if we can argue anything of what she did was an act of feminism. She just seemed like a bit of a bastard.
Oh yeah, no, she's just a bitch.
Yeah. Then, now, this one I do not agree with. I straight up do not agree with this, because later in the tale he talks about Tar Ankhalime, or Ankhalime, or however you want to say it, Queen of Numenor, as being a fallen / semi-evil woman. And this is the daughter of Aldarion and Arendis in the Second Age. And she, so for anyone not familiar, in the Second Age on the Isle of Numenor, I think Tar Ankhalime was the first queen of Numenor. She was known, I think she was known for essentially toying with her suitors, toying with men and then discarding them. She married out of political necessity, but there was no real love between her and her husband, and they embarrassed each other throughout their lives, I think is how the story goes. Now, he puts that as a fallen woman, and I don't agree with that, purely because, and I don't know your opinion on this, with the story of Aldarion and Arendis, I think that is just a product of utterly fucking shitty parenting. Just pure shit. Like, how familiar are you with the story of Aldarion and Arendis? It's my favourite story of the Second Age, that's why I ask about it.
Well, I think I don't know a whole lot about Aldarion and Arendis, but at Calumet, I think that that's just like generational trauma, because I know that Aldarion chose the sea over his family when she was a kid. And then that's basically what her husband did too.
Yeah, that's it. And then when at the end of the story, like, he humiliates her in front of loads of people after she'd been like a bastard to him and what have you. And there's one particular bit, and as a dad, this really hurt me when I read this part of the story, where Aldarion picks her up, but then is in such a rush to get back to the sea that he just kind of drops her and runs off. And I know for a fact that as a parent, there are things that you will do that will stick with your child forever. And I have no trouble believing that seeing her dad drop her because he's more interested in the sea and not caring about, doesn't really care about her, is something that would stick with your child for the rest of their life. And then the fact that when her dad was at sea, her mum was poisoning her essentially against men in general. So like it's utter bastardry on both sides. So I don't put that down to being a fallen woman. I think, like you said, I think that might just be generational trauma. It's just so
like, because
sad.
it's not like she's naturally a twat. It like that's something that she was nurtured to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to take a point away from the author there. I don't think Tar Ankhalime counts really as evil, but he does make a point that the three queens of Numenor are really just treated kind of ambivalently, or tend to go on to the negative side, which, because he says that the last queen of Numenor was just queen in all but in name alone, and her husband did most of the running of Numenor, which I need to refresh myself, but I think she's the queen who tries to climb Men Altama as it's sinking, isn't she?
Yeah,
I can't remember her. Is it Queen Muriel?
Yep,
I thought
her cousin Farazan usurped her.
Yeah, I thought there was. I think I was looking at her other name.
Oh, I forget her.
Yeah, I was looking at her other name. Vanimelde? Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I think it was. Tar Vanimelde. No, I think we're thinking of someone else. Anyway, right, yeah, she was the last. No, Miriel won't have been queen because Pharazôn took the scepter from her, didn't he?
Yeah, but she was still called Tar Muriel
Yeah.
sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I mean, as in the queen being the first one to inherit the throne rather than pass it over.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because she was Vanimelda was the daughter of Tar Telemate. Okay, but we'll get to that when I cover Numenor. And considering we're recording this whilst I'm in the middle of my Sauron series, I am shitting myself getting to Numenor because there is so much wrapped up in the Second Age to do with Sauron and Numenor that it's going to be there's going to be a lot of me saying, but I'll cover this when we get to Numenor. But anyway, right. So if we go back to Ungoliant and Shelob, there is a quote I want to read, which is fascinating from this paper, and the quote goes: "Their sexual reproduction is seen as a monstrous and hideous activity. Ungoliant and Shelob, as a result, are integral to the study of femininity and women's places within the world of Middle-earth, as they stand in stark contrast to figures often discussed." And he goes on to mention the terms monstrous and feminine, and specifies that this applies specifically to the spiders because they're completely irredeemable into an acceptable patriarchal order of creation. And that, and I apologise if I'm being crass here, does that not sound like the most academic way someone's ever said you can't make a whore a housewife?
Yes.
I read that and I was like, you coward. You've just made me read all that when you just could have said can't make a whore a housewife.
Exactly.
That's the exact sentiment, right? Like that's not me being a bastard. That I read that and it was just like, yeah, that is exactly what you're saying. Like, or you're saying that Tolkien is saying. It's just fuck me. I read it and I was just like, oh man, this is the thing I have with academic papers, and I don't know if you've had much to do with like the Tolkien Society. Have you attended any of their events or seminars or anything like that?
I've never attended any of their events, but I do keep up with them on social media.
Right. So one big beef I have with the Tolkien Society, and the reason I started this podcast in the first place, and as you're probably gathering because you've listened before and what have you, and in fact, you know what? No, this extends to creators like yourself, to Miranda, to Alex, to Max, and all these people that we all create Tolkien content, right? We cut through the prose, we cut through the bullshit, for lack of a better word, because we enjoy the stories. We love the stories. We love the concepts. We love the world. And you want to deliver that to people in a way that's easy to understand so that everybody can join in these things together. And my big beef with the Tolkien Society is that a lot of their contributors go against what people like me and you do, which is and I think purposefully, they make things highfalutin and too academic, and they take a long time to say things like you can't make a whole housewife. And that pisses me off, like, because it runs counter to everything we do. Like, I don't know your view on this, but when I see like really high arty-farty stuff, I'm just like, oh, fuck off, man. Say what you mean.
Yeah, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love reading all the academic stuff to it, but I think keeping it that way and really being like this is the only way to talk about Tolkien is very discriminatory to people who don't understand that. And that's why I really like the way that a lot of us, regular Tolkien creators get it across to people, because I'll get comments on my stuff all the time being like, thank you so much, because I've read the Silmarillion like 2-3 times and you're the first time that I've been able to understand it. And I'm like, oh, sweet.
Yeah, and there's stuff like that. The one of my favourites I had, it was absolutely lovely, was someone sent me an email saying I have pretty bad ADHD, and I've always wanted to get into Tolkien, but I can't kind of make myself focus. And they said, like, when you and Becca are talking, it's like listening to two friends in the same room, and it's a lot easier to take in, and that means the world to me. And it's just like, oh, that's fantastic. Like, that's exactly what I'm after. It's just, and the whole premise of the podcast is it's like we're like two friends in a pub talking about these things. So then to then have that to juxtapose that with some of the things I've seen coming out of these academic papers, like there was one seminar I attended, and it was Tom Bombadil as a Taoist icon, and then another one was the Exile of the Noldor is a parallel to Jewish persecution, and then another one was Eru Iluvatar as a Bartesian listener god, right? And all of those by themselves sound pretty cool, except not a fucking one of them, Kaya, I swear to God, not a one of them did anything more than barely mention the stories and the characters. It was all just used as a vehicle for this highfalutin arty-farty shit. And that's what gets me, because if you've read The Monsters and the Critics, where Tolkien was talking about people who studied Beowulf, one of the biggest criticisms he makes is that these scholars, for lack of a better word, they do everything except talk about the stories to which they're studying. And I don't think, and the irony is not lost on me, that we're seeing the same thing happen with Tolkien's writings now. So all the things he wrote about is like, hey, these people are talking about everything except the stories. Yeah. With all the things I've just mentioned, like, there's a lot of academic discourse around everything except the shit Tolkien actually fucking wrote about.
Yeah, it's like they use these stories as an excuse to let us know that they know big words and that they think that they're smarter than us.
Yeah. Exactly, like 100%. So I wrote an article for Amon Hen, and it was published back in June, right? And it was about, I think, it was my theory that Eru allows Morgoth to be evil because ain't no sunshine without rain, right? That's it, is that you need to be able to appreciate Arda when Eru fixes it, because we've all experienced Arda when it's proper shit. That's the long and the short of my article, and I kept everything within it to events within the stories, and I was talking about the characters in the stories. And as I finished it, and I it was published and everything, I thought, how fucking hard is it? How hard is it for people to just keep to this? Like, just talk about the stories? Do you know what I mean? Like, ugh.
Yeah. Well, apparently it's so hard because they rarely do it.
Yeah, but that being said, there is a balance, and I think this paper might be it's kind of on the right side of that balance, despite me taking the piss a little bit, because he does talk about events within the stories. Because I've got another quote. Yes, I've got another passage from it, and then we'll talk about some of Tolkien, because I thought in the first half of this, where you were saying, it lost me in the second half. In the first half of this, I was like, this seems like a bit of a reach. Surely Tolkien doesn't actually think that. And then I went and read some of the letters that were referenced, and I was like, okay, yeah, he's a very typical conservative, typical kind of bloke for that era kind of thing. So Chris Hansen says, their lack of subservience to men and their lack of strict monogamy makes them monstrous, not their outward appearance. As such, the monstrous feminine is a manifest instance of woman in Tolkien's work. It is the form the evil woman is embodied in, while the proper woman is defined by her acceptance of Catholic binary gender norms, subservience to the husband, monogamy, sexual restraint only for procreative activity, etc. To be clear, women and the monstrous feminine are not separate beings. The monstrous feminine are women, Ungoliant and Shelob are women, but they are a specific form of women. They have fallen and are thus evil and monstrous in form. Notably, men do not become monstrous when polyamory or unacceptable relationships are taken up, nor are the women whom the men choose. It is only when the woman initiates sexual encounter and when the men fail to have power over her that she becomes monstrous. It's a pretty bold statement. But
it is, but yeah. That was one of the parts that from like a societal standpoint, I agree with, because that is a way that a lot of people view women like that. Like, obviously, I don't think that, because I think they're fucking great. I don't think they're monstrous at all, but I'm also one of those people who sees monstrous as a compliment when it comes to femininity. Because I think, like, the way that I see it is that, yeah, they fucking deserve to be monstrous, especially with the the almost like the pedestal you want to put them in, the box you want to shove them in. And Ungoliant and Shelob are just a big middle finger to that.
Yeah, I mean, when he says like it's only when the woman initiates sexual encounter and when the men fail to have power over her, she becomes monstrous. So like this this paper could have been written by one of the spiders that Ungoliant fucked, then tried to kill, but he got away. And he was like, "I'm gonna go write a paper about this."
Fuck this bitch.
Because yeah, because it's right. It's like, so she initiates the sexual encounters. Because it says specifically in the Silmarillion, the published Silmarillion, she mated with, not they mated with her. It was she mated with the monstrous spiders of of Nan Dungortheb. And when the men failed to have power over her, and thus, she ate them afterwards, that's when she becomes monstrous. And this is the same thing that happens with Shelob as well. Like, Shelob is just a smaller Ungoliant for all intents and purposes. There's not a massive amount that sets her aside, really. I don't think so, anyway. I mean, do you?
I mean,
Yeah.
apart from like their abilities, there's not a whole lot that sets them aside because, yeah, Shelob will eat just about anything, but she can't devour the way Ungoliant could. Because like Ungoliant could just swallow anything, including light, and belch out unlight. But Shelob isn't able to do that. She's only able to physically eat people.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that goes back to, well, that's more of the same, really, isn't it? Is that by the time we get to Lord of the Rings, it's a post-apocalyptic world. Like, the apocalypse has already happened, and we're seeing the decline of the ages. The magic is leaving. That, well, magic's a terrible term to use for Tolkien. Go back and listen to my magic series. But in terms of Tolkien, it's that maybe Shelob was able to do this once, but her power is fading now because she's destined to fade away as well. It's just a bygone relic, a myth.
Well, like the way Tolkien describes it is that whenever the first of anything is created, it's great and it's amazing, it's beautiful, it's so powerful. But then as they procreate and their descendants, come to life, their characteristics start to dwindle. So it's almost like the Númenóreans being these great people who could live up to 300, 400 years, but then by the time it gets to Aragorn, he only lives to about 210. He's not as tall. He's not as great as these Númenóreans were. So it's like Ungoliant was this great evil being, but then once we get down to Shelob, she's only like a great physical mortal being, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So not only does Kaya want to bring feminism into the podcast, she's now bringing fucking Plato's The Cave into it as well. How much can we do in one episode? But you're right. It's like it's a copy of a copy of a copy. Essentially, that's where it's diminished. Like, Lorien is an echo, or Lothlorien is an echo of Aman. Well, not even then. It's an echo of an earlier age when the elves were strong, which the self is an echo of the Light of the Two Trees when they were the proper Kaiakayy when they lived in Middle Earth. Like, and it's a very common theme, isn't it? That things are fading and passing away, and that you're only really able to get a moment in time, essentially, because that's what Lothlorien is, isn't it? It's a held moment in time.
Yeah, and even that's with one of the rings of power, because Lothlorien wouldn't be able to be Lothlorien without Narya or Nienna. No, it's not Nienna.
Nenya, yeah,
Nenya.
So
Nenya.
I always think it's Nenya business, and that's how I remember it.
But yeah, like if you look at the earlier like elven cities like Eregion or Lindon, like they didn't need rings of power to stay beautiful, but now like places like Rivendell and Lothlorien, they need it or else they're going to completely fade.
And that's interesting. You mentioned Eregion and Lindon, because could it be to do with the concentration of the Kaiakayy? Because Lothlorien has a bigger instance of the shit. What the fucking wood elves called again? Sindar.
Sindar.
The Sindar elves. Whereas Eregion and Lindon would have had a higher population of Kaiakayy. So, and I think there's a quote that Aman is the Undying Lands because the elves live there, not because of any intrinsic properties. Like, it's because that's where the powers dwell, and that's what hallows it. It's not
Yeah,
so
it's not
much.
the land that makes you immortal, but the immortal that hollows the land.
Yeah, exactly. So if Galadriel would have just cut the mortgage prices, then Lothlorien could have survived long into the Fourth Age. But but again, like, yeah, that all makes sense because the elves leave, Middle Earth declines because of it, and all these places pass away because the elves have gone in. And it's the elves that, they hallow the places that they dwell in. But anyway, that's a bit too cheery. Let's get back to Catholic sex. So, as I've mentioned,
Get back to depression and shame.
everybody has sex, and you should all feel ashamed. So, as I mentioned, we know that Middle-earth is a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, and this extends to the sexuality within it, it seems. So, we've mentioned briefly laws and customs among the Eldar, which spells out how elven marriage works and sexual practices to a lesser extent. And essentially, to a T, it is missionary sex for the sole purpose of procreation, right? That's the fucking long and short of it. And marriage is for life. You get one partner. If you don't, literal gods have to say yes in order for you to do anything else. So it's all very much super monogamy.
Yep.
And sorry, go on.
Oh no, I was just agreeing.
So Tolkien seems to have some views on sexual relationships that I would, as I mentioned today, it wouldn't pass the vibe check because it's very, very conservative for our time. So in 1941, he sent a letter to Michael, his son. And in his letter, he says that sex is the devil's favourite subject and that friendship between men and women is practically impossible. He goes on to say that maybe later in life, friendship between men and women could happen if they were both saints. So he seemed to hold this view that you couldn't really be friends with women because you'd end up humping each other. I mean...
Yeah, and I think that he does a very good job at contradicting himself in his own story with that. Because, like, if you think about it, like, Éowyn and Mary become very good friends. And
I mean, they spent a long time in camp together, Kaya. How do you know?
I mean, he does for a long time think that she's Dernhelm, so.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. But then, Éowyn is one where she, arguably through a certain lens, is diminished after she acts like a man to achieve great things. She is then, or not forced, but she then adopts the role of essentially a housewife and falls back into place, for lack of a better word. Not saying that's my view, but that's a certain way you could look at it, I think, which is a shame. But I do, yeah, you're right. Like, Mary's he's a man, and Éowyn is a woman. So yeah, they do have friendship. Galadriel and Gimli, but then he goes to great pains actually to say that Gimli's like her servant, and actually Gimli does seem to be a bit in love with her. I don't know.
Yeah, I 100% agree that Gimli does seem to be a bit in love with her, but at that point, I think that's with them. I think that would be magnifying, and no offense to males, but also full offense. But that's really Gimli's magnifying of the male desperation towards women because he's just enamored with her. And then Galadriel is just like, oh, you're so cute.
Yeah, it's weird to see that. Like, we had the first recorded simp and we never picked up on it.
It's great.
But it is weird. Like, but I don't know. There's so much more to their relationship, but I do think it's pretty interesting that dwarves essentially had such low libido they erased themselves from existence. Yet he was just like, my God, she's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. It's just fuck knows. But
and I don't even think it was the oh my God, she's so beautiful, I want to procreate with her. It was just in awe of how amazing she was.
Yeah, true. But so Tolkien seemed to have this idea that sex has its proper place, and outside of that was a no-no, essentially. Because it does say, the paper points out that any time there's improper sexual relationships happening in Middle-earth, it's a big deal and tends to lead to really awful consequences. So we've got Ungoliant and Shelob, that literally spreads evil throughout the world. Wanting to fuck his cousin leads to the fall of Gondolin, essentially. Like, it plays a big part in it. Because, Morgoth promises that he could take his cousin as his wife, and he's like, all right, bro, say no more.
Well, see, adding on to that, I was surprised that when they brought up Maeglin, I was surprised that they didn't talk about Eol and Edithel, because if you remember how their relationship started was, Eol hated the Noldor, and here comes Edithel, this princess, and in Tolkien's original draft of it, he R-words her, right? And that sex is the end all be all for a relationship. So once that happens, you're married. So he forced her into being a wife, and then she was just living miserably, and they created Maeglin. And even then, he wasn't allowed to have the name that Edithel had given her because it was in her mother tongue, and Eol hated it.
Yeah, I mean, you and I seem to be birds of a feather, because my very next sentence that I've got written in my notes is, I'd argue as an extension of Maeglin, or maybe as a rebuttal to improper unions, is that Eol taking Arethel by force as his bride led to the evils of Maeglin.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. Like, if your dad is your model for relationships and he's that much of a cunt, then what the fuck are you expecting? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like, this is the other side of the coin to Tara and Calumet. It's that this is more the fault of the parents rather than, well, actually your parents doing improper sexual relationship shit. So yeah, Maeglin, I'd say again, is another shitty parenting situation.
Yeah,
there's a fair few contenders for shittest dad in the Tolkien legendarium. Eru's at the top, but there's others. So, fun fact: when you join, when people join the podcast Discord, one of the things I do to get you roll is so I've seen it's like, oh, choose your faction, like elves, blah blah blah. I don't do it like that. You've got to choose who do you think did nothing wrong. And that is, I think, a much better indicator of character for getting you roll in the Discord. It's like, so I personally think Eru did nothing wrong because it all had to happen the way it happened. But then there's Thorin did nothing wrong, Gollum did nothing wrong, Manwë did nothing wrong, Sauron did nothing wrong. I think, I just think it's a better way of character. But back to improper sexual relation. Ungoliant did nothing wrong. I might have to add that one, I think that might have to be black text. Unlight. What's the colour for unlight?
Just grey.
But Eol, as I like to call him, the inself, because that's exactly what he is. I think he's a bigger stem for evils due to improper sexual behaviour, I think, than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Then this one's a bit more spurious because this story just ended badly for everyone regardless. But Turin fucking his sister and her being pregnant with an incest baby. That didn't end well for anybody in that story. No,
literally nobody, because even Glaurung died.
No. Poor Glaurung. Yeah, poor Glaurung.
They even put the fucking dragon down, all because they were brother and sister.
Yeah, it's just, my God. So improper sexual union there. That is just more like the icing on the cake rather than anything fundamental, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's just, in fact, the improper sexual relationship in that story is just how much Turin fucked everybody else. Anybody who came into contact with him got fucked, and that's the improper sexual relationship.
Yeah, and then still fucking feeling sorry for himself at every damn turn.
Oh my God, right. My biggest criticism with Turin is that he has no introspection whatsoever. Not once does he stop and think, is it me? Am I the drama? Never once.
That's not the drama.
It's never once. It's always fucking woe is me all the time. I'm going to change my name. That'll sort this out.
Like
that
when
guy.
it's the curse. Like when it's the curse. Never mind that bringing up the curse every time will probably just make it worse.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So again, and then another improper kind of sexual one. Not really sexual, but well, maybe. Finwë and Miriel, their divorce. He got remarried to Indis. That might be and the author puts forward that this is a contributor to Feanor acting the way he does. Again, I do broadly agree with this. Yeah, Feanor viewing him as a child of divorce, I think, puts things into a little bit more perspective. Doesn't excuse his behaviour, but it does explain some of it. It doesn't excuse it, but it does explain some of it.
Yeah.
Because I don't think if I stole a ship, murdered some dock workers, then crashed the ship, and then I was in court and I said, but my parents were shit. I don't think they'd be like, oh, fair enough, you're free to walk. Don't come back to this particular harbour and you're fine. Like, I don't think I'd get off that lightly.
I mean, that's what a lot of dudes use as an excuse when they, like, are shit in relationships. So, like, oh, I
Is
know
it?
I cheated
Well,
on you. Yeah, like, I know I cheated on you, like, 16 times, but my mom and my dad never got back together. So,
so I've never been in that many relationships with men, so I've never had that said to me, if I'm honest. I've not been in any relationships with men. I don't know why I said it like that. No, fair enough. Fair enough. I do know the only thing I really know is when I've talked to like my wife about dating and stuff like that. Is there's a lot of bullshit that men and women have to deal with that stems from insecurity when like you're single. Women also have to deal with a lot of like dick pics on top of that, and men just being fucking creeps in general. Whereas I think the most I've ever really had to deal with is just like really toxically insecure people, or just people who are just crazy. I've never got any unsolicited genital pics and be like, oh, not again. Fuck's sake.
yeah, no. And I think that can also circle back to, like, being defined as a monstrous woman in the Tolkien community, because, like, I will get so many fucking creeps in my DMs or in my
Yes,
comments all the
we've
fucking
talked
time.
about this. Yes, we have. Me and you have talked about this specifically, haven't we? I do
Yeah,
remember this conversation. Yeah, because was it like you said, like you've got like a block list like a mile long, and it's
I do.
basically just people saying OnlyFans, like not
Yes.
even a
And
question, just the words.
like there's this app called NGLs, like not gonna lie, people can submit anonymous questions. And I made the mistake of putting that out and being like, ask me stuff. And just a line of people being like, when you drop in that OF link, you should do this on OF. You should do OF, X, Y, and Z. And I'm just like, oh my God, you fucking weirdos. And then I'll get the real
Right.
weirdos in the comments. And a while ago, one of my friends, she had posted a screenshot of a creepy comment that she got, and she crossed out the name, and I inboxed her, and I was like, why would you, I mean, no hate to you, but why would you cross out the name? Like, they said it publicly, embarrass them. Like, they
Yeah, I
clearly
mean,
have no
yeah.
problem commenting it, so put them on blast.
So I'll tell you what we're going to do, Kaya. Right, we're going to combat this together. So next time you get one of these messages, right, you're going to forward it to me, and then with your consent, what I'm going to do, right, is I'm going to take a picture with my wife's bra on, but it's going to be on my ass cheeks. So I'm going to put Becca's bra on my ass cheeks, and I'm going to take a picture, and it's going to look like some cleavage, and I'm going to send it back to you. But then I'm going to take another one, and we're going to pan it back out so you can see it's my ass, and it's going to be me with my thumbs up, and that's what everybody's going to get. Is that like anybody who says you just you set up the auto? Do you like those shitty people who sell courses on Instagram where they're like mention the words F in the comments for a link, and then once that they'll automatically get that picture of me. And I
Oh my
think
God.
I reckon it might take a week and it'll just stop dead
That'd be
because
so
they'll all
fucking
come
hilarious.
they'll all come to me.
Yeah, but then like it'll circle back to, like, if I say something mean, even though they're being a fucking creep, if I say something mean, I'm the bitch. Like, why couldn't I just take the compliment? Like, nah, 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 nah.
Yeah, and as a monstrously sexual person, I imagine that's tough to deal with sometimes. If anyone used the word unbridled with me, I don't know if how well I'd take it, but it is tough. It is tough to be a woman on the internet, 100%.
Yeah, and like
It's also tough to be a giant spider who likes to fuck. It's really you can't win. You just can't win.
exactly, Exactly. But like, you know, it all boils down to consent, right? Because like last night I had posted this video that I was just like, Lord of the Rings thirst trap. And I was really just showing off a thing that Box Lunch had sent me. And I was like, okay, well, I need to prepare for people who are like, well, you post this, you shouldn't be surprised when you get comments like this. And I was like, in my head, I'm like, well, there's a point of not asking for it and then welcoming in certain types of comments. Because, like, you can compliment me and, like, you know, call me beautiful, all that kind of stuff. But then when you're just like ignoring my lore videos, being like, I didn't hear a single word you said because I just noticed how kissable your lips were, block immediately.
God, like, who writes that out and be like, this is going to go well for me?
Yeah.
This is good. Oh, this is the one.
So one, like she's gonna DM me being like, you want to find out?
God, I mean, do you know what? I bet there's some people that probably do things like that. But do you know how Ungoliant would have dealt with this? She'd have fucking ate them.
Honestly, I'm about to start doing that. They're just pissing me off.
But anyway, like if it gets really bad, let's circle back about the arse cheek cleavage idea. We'll put it on ice for now, but I think it's a. In fact, any woman who's having a problem on the internet, find a fat guy you trust, find a fat guy you know. This is advice from Chris. Find a fat guy you know, tell him put a bra on his arse cheeks and take a picture. I've done it before when I was at university. It was fucking hilarious. It works.
I approve this message.
Right, fuck, right. Okay, I'm losing my. Anyway, so. We'll move on to non-monogamy violates the natural order, which we know, right? The guy also uses the term unbridled sexual intercourse when talking about Ungoliant, and this makes me think he must have really loved the... Have you played the Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War games?
I have.
And you know that meme I sent you about sexy Shelob?
Oh, yeah.
That is exactly what he was talking about. And for those who aren't familiar with the meme, I'll post it out with this episode. But it's someone wrote a green text of J.R. Tolkien talking to Christopher and saying, "Christopher, my son, did I ever tell you the full story of Shelob? You know, the monstrous spider descended from the vile Ungoliant, which I used to read at our Oxford meetings of the Inklings. Well, what I didn't mention back then was Shelob could also transform into a totally hot babe, all pale and dark and wan like Rebecca in Ivanhoe, or what will later come to be known as the goth subculture. In fact, she looked very much like the pornographic actress Stoya, who will be born 13 years after I die. Christopher, I will be entrusting you with my estate. If there is ever a video game of my adaptation of my work, you must make sure they get the Shelob right. Make sure she is what the Anglo-Saxons would have called a Hede Echtje. A real sexy bitch." That I know. This article was written in 2021, right? This paper was written in 2021. He was playing Shadow of War, or Shadow of War, I think it's the second one. He got to the Shelob scene. He paused the game and he was like, "I've got to go and write about this." Like that, I've no doubt in my mind that is exactly what the fuck was going through his mind. I mean, am I wrong? Tell me I'm wrong.
It's exactly what his pop wanted.
I do love that. It's like, just, do you know, like when people die and DMT goes through their brain, like, and that's what the last thing is DMT that gives them like a massive trip. I think Tolkien just had like a prophecy of the future, and he was like, "Christopher, in order to survive, you need to make Shelob sexy. Sex sells." Oh God, right. We then talk about Ungoliant having kids outside of marriage is spreading evil. Do you know when I mentioned earlier that when I read Tolkien's letters about his thoughts on women, I was like, okay, right, he is kind of like what we'd consider very conservative now. So in 1941, this is coming from letter 43, he wrote to Michael again, where he gave advice, thoughts on how women are naturally subservient to men and are only interested in stuff because men they're attracted to are. So, Kaya, I assume that there was a man in your life at one point and that's why you're into Lord of the Rings. It can be no other reason. None at all. You're only interested in everything you're interested in because a man is. So that's exactly what it's got to be. Yeah. It's got to be true, right?
Yep, that silly little...
Yeah, just a silly little hobby.
No, a silly little X chromosome of mine. I'm not allowed to have hobbies because of it.
Yeah, exactly. So the full passage is... Women really have not much part in all this, though they may use the language of romantic love, since this is so entwined in all our idioms. The sexual impulse makes women very sympathetic and understanding, or especially desirous of being so, and very ready to enter into all the interests as far as they can, from ties to religion of the young man they are attracted to. No intent necessarily to deceive, sheer instinct, the servient help-me instinct, generously warmed by desire and young blood. Under this impulse, they can in fact often achieve very remarkable insight and understanding, even of things otherwise outside their natural range, for it is their gift to be receptive, stimulated, fertilized, in many other matters than the physical, by the male. Every teacher knows that. How quickly an intelligent woman can be taught, grasp his ideas, see his point, and how they can go no further when they leave his hand or when they cease to take a personal interest in him. But this is their natural avenue to love. Before the young woman knows where she is, and she may actually fall in love, which for her, an unspoiled natural young woman, means that she wants to become the mother of the young man's children, even if they desire it by no means clear to her or explicit. And then things are going to happen, and they'd be very painful and harmful if things go wrong, particularly if the young man only wanted a temporary guiding star and divinity and was merely enjoying the flattery of sympathy, nicely seasoned with the titillation of sex. All quite innocent, of course, and worlds away from seduction. So, that is from Tolkien himself writing to his son, giving some worldly advice. Women are only interested in things men are because that's what makes them attractive to men, so they can have their kids. But did you notice the slight language change? He doesn't say if men want to pump and dump or fuck and chuck or any of the other things. He says if men want a temporary guiding star. I think that's one of the only points I've reached with Tolkien where I've been like, oh, fuck off, man.
Yeah.
Like, just, nah. Like, he is a product of his time, absolutely. But that is the kind of sentiment you do hear from, like, older people who are alive now. Sometimes. So that's a point where I safely say, fuck off. It's full of shit.
100% agree.
Yeah, but it's still fascinating to see that. I don't know. It's fascinating to see that thought process because if the way he wrote Shelob and Ungoliant was purposeful for the things we've been talking about, then that is a glimpse into how you would weave your I don't know, your inclinations, your beliefs into your writing. And it's again, it's seeing things through a lens I've never even considered before. Like, now I know that was at one point, I'm not saying that was till the end of his life, but at that point, that's how he thought of women. Then you look at Shelob and Ungoliant, it is a lot easier to see, like, oh, okay, this is what happens when a woman doesn't obey, like, the natural order of things. It's fascinating.
Yeah, like, you could argue that that is the way that he thought. The way that I like to think of it is that that's just how he saw how the world was. Because really, Shelob and Ungoliant are everything that a woman was not allowed to be during that time. Like, regardless of what religion Tolkien or anyone else was subscribed to. Because, like, they were both, like, not only overly sexual and never married when they produced any of their children, but they were also, like, you know, angry and selfish and self-serving. And she took care of herself before she took care of her kids. And that was a big no-no during that time. So I think it's not just a view of what Tolkien saw, but what everyone else saw.
Yeah, well, arguably, it's still quite unacceptable to take care of. Taking care of yourself is different to abandoning your kids to focus on, like, to for your own selfish reasons, I guess. Like, it's a bit of a difference there, but
that's how people these days could view it. Like, whenever a mom posts about doing the slightest self-care, she's 100% demonized, like she is abandoning her children.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that, like, self-care is super important. Like, so, like, me, like I said, me and Becca have got a 3-year-old, and this is probably one of the more patriarchal things. I think it's probably the right things I do, Becca is terrible at me telling her to like go and take some time to yourself, go and do something for yourself, right? She's fucking terrible at doing that when I ask her to. So I take that decision away from her sometimes. Like as like this is the most patriarchal thing I do. Is like every so often I'll book her a hotel or like a spa treatment or something, and I don't give her the choice because she's so bad at taking care of herself because she's so worried that that's how it might be viewed. Is that like you're doing something for yourself? It's like, oh, you're a bad mom. And I'm like, no, you need to go away and take a break so that you can come back refreshed, because we all want to be Muriel sometimes and go and lie down in Lorien and just fucking die because we're so exhausted. But like, yeah, like I 100% I understand where you're coming from. That like a woman doing something for herself could be seen as being demonized, and then Ungoliant and Shelob are quite big examples of that. Like, God forbid a woman has hobbies, you know,
Yeah.
eating and fucking.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of why I love them so much, because I mean, when it comes to y'all's relationship, I was in a very opposite relationship to that before my fiance right now. So when I was with my son's father, I hadn't gone out by myself with my friends until my son was 3. And the night I did, he was blowing up my phone, calling me a shit mom because I wasn't, at home. I chose to go out with my friends. And then he was blowing up my friend's phone, being like, he just doesn't want me to make bad decisions because I'm a mom now, and yada, yada, yada. And I never heard the fucking end of it. And that was the last time I went out while I was still with him.
Oh, fuck that. Fuck off. No,
Yeah.
that's the thing, is that like sometimes I feel like a bit of a misogynist when I do it, like, but and then I'm like, I don't give a fuck, like I don't fucking do
No,
it.
because you want her to take care of herself before she has a mental break.
Yeah, because I'm like, it's going to be a lot harder to be a single parent if she's in a fucking asylum somewhere. She's just fucking
Exactly.
snapped. Yeah, like there'll be time where I'll just be like, right, I've booked this. Fuck off. Like, I say it like that as well. I'm like, get out. And there's times where I'm like, right, just get out, or like I'll take the kid out, or like you just do stuff, and don't get it twisted. Like, what another thing that annoys me about being a parent, and sorry for anyone listening who's not a parent, we veered off again. The bar for being a dad is ridiculous, and Tolkien doesn't help this, by the way, because most of the dads in Middle Earth are fucking shit. But the bar for being a dad in real life is fucking stupidly low. Like, I just do the most normal things with my daughter, and everyone acts like I'm the second coming. And I'm like, I'm just a dad. Fuck off. Like, but then you mentioned, like you've just mentioned, people like that, and I'm like, oh, okay. I think if one of the worst things I do is book her a hotel, I think I'm all right. Like, I'll tell her to get out the house.
Oh,
It's
yeah, no.
yeah. But we see this, like we see this woven all through Tolkien's works as well. Is that like he seemed to be a good dad. Like, his kids seem very, very fond of him. So it's interesting how we then see it in the writing. And like as another tangent, I've just have you played the Silent Hill 2 remake at all?
I have not.
Right. So I've just finished that, and it's like a horror game for anyone not aware of it. And I watched a video afterwards because I'm a nerd like that. I watched a video about the game after I completed it. And it says, whenever you see a character looking at a mirror in like a film or a game, that is then it's shorthand for saying there is another version of them that is often darker. And that like blew my mind. I was like, what the fuck? I've never noticed that ever in anything. And the point being that once you learn these things about how writing, how literary works are created, or how like movie language works with how things are represented that you've never picked up on before, you can't unsee it. So now, after this conversation and the research we've done, I don't think I'll ever be able to look at Shelob and Ungoliant as anything except kind of, for lack of a better term, like feminist icons, but it's the real nuance comes in. What does feminist icon mean, and how is that viewed, and is that a good or a bad thing? And I suppose it depends on where you stand in, because we've got terms like monstrous, feminine, unbridled sexual intercourse, but then we've also got feminine rage and self-care. That can all of these terms can apply to these giant spiders. And it's fucking wild that we can even have these conversations.
Yeah, I think it's so great that Tolkien like left characters like this up to our interpretation, so that way we can have conversations like this, and that way we can interpret these characters to be really any type of inspiration that we want to be, so long as we jump through the right hoops, so to say.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we're coming towards the end now. But there is a couple of things I did want to talk about first and get your opinion on. So there was another paper that I had a quick look at by Rachel Maddox from 2018, and this puts forward the idea that Tolkien's treatment of women in Lord of the Rings and other works appears to be something called friendly sexism. Now, I didn't know what this meant, so I had to go and have a look. And it means that he doesn't despise women, and like far from it. It's just that Tolkien is just guilty of what I'm sure a lot of, not guilty, I hate using the word guilt. He falls foul of what lots of people do, men and women as well, is that it's not that he hates women, it's just he misunderstands them, he misrepresents them in his writing because of this misunderstanding. What would you, I mean, where would you fall on this? Do you think, where on the scale of utter misogynist to ultra feminist with friendly sexism, somewhere left of centre, where would you put Tolkien based on things we've discussed today and these other writings about female characters?
I think it would go back to like how he was a product of his time and what he grew up with, because I don't think that he's sexist in the misogynistic, like, oh, women belong in the kitchen type way. I think it's very much he puts women up on this pedestal. And if they were to do something that would make them want to climb off the pedestal, then they have to start acting like a man or become evil. So, like, we have the example with Ungoliant and Shelob being evil, but then we also have the example of Hilaith or Eowyn, where if they're not acting as the stereotypical like pure woman, then they have to take up the mantle of a man and either not get married, not have children, or do what Eowyn did and take up the guise of a man in order to do what she wants to do, to be a shield maiden, if that makes sense. And then after she's all said and done the shield maiden stuff, then she's back to being married. And we don't really hear a lot of what happens after the War of the Ring with Eowyn and Faramir, but like, other than they have a son. So
Yeah, that's true, yeah, because I did read somewhere else that Tolkien was more of a, instead of sexist, misogynist, whatever, I don't really think those terms could properly apply to him, because that's applying our lens of today in the past, like you've mentioned.
I don't think it was in like a hateful way. I think it was just in a cultural way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because the Catholics. Oh, sorry, we had a little technical blip there. You back? You good?
Yeah, good.
Oh, good. Okay, so the last thing we said was about Tolkien being a gender essentialist, that women and men have these roles, and that was just what they needed to do, and to go outside of this. And the Catholics were worship, have Mother Mary up on a pedestal, and I think that's probably more of it, is that it's a product of his time, and I think that, I know it's the answer we get for a lot of it, but I wanted to run this anecdote by you. I only found this out today. Did you know that in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, there are more named horses than named women?
Oh, I sure did.
I could not believe that, and I went and I had a look, and there's 11 women and 15 horses. What the fuck? That is wild. Fair. I mean, but then arguably, some of these women have far bigger impact than like fucking most of the men combined. Like, I think one of the most common things, and I'm certainly guilty of this, is, well, not guilty, but women who, women in Tolkien, it's quality over quantity, I think. And that's what I generally think, is that, there might only be 11, but they all have, generally, more of them have impacts than most of the men. Like Galadriel, for example, is one of the most important characters in the entire legendarium, never mind the trilogy. It's just, yeah,
and I 100% agree with that.
Right, so that I think it brings us to the close. I think we've had a really good discussion now. I do want to run this last capstone by you, see what you think of this, right? I read, so we've discussed today about Tolkien writing women, we've discussed Shelob and Ungoliant as kind of feminist icons, and we've discussed like the views of sexuality within Tolkien and what have you. I then came across a comment which made me laugh. Do you know when you have those moments where you're like, has everything I've researched been for nothing? Because I read someone who wrote, Tolkien just couldn't write characters full stop. And it wasn't just women. He couldn't just write characters at all. Because all the characters we get are generally pretty black or white. But where he properly shines is his world building, his fictional history, his philology. It's the events and the actions. We never really get caught up in the monologues or the internal... we never get caught up in like the internal thought processes or the internal monologues of the characters. So it's only because we're looking so closely at women that we're finding them lacking. But if we were to look at a lot of the male characters, we'd probably find a lot of similar things as well. Like Legolas being a complete himbo, for example. And that made me fucking howl because I learned that about 5 minutes before you joined the recording today. And I thought, have we done all this research for naught? So where do you stand on that? Is it women, or does Tolkien did it just not write characters very well because he wasn't trying to?
No, I think I agree with that actually. Because now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, because even some of the greatest men that he's written, there's not a whole lot to them. Because like even with Manwë, it's just the stuff he's done. And other than that, it's just like he's this think piece for Eru. Or even Eru. Like Eru is just this big giant god of creation, and he's just created it, left. Or Aule, like created the dwarves, created a whole bunch of Middle Earth, left. I think Frodo is the one that has probably the most in depth when it comes to being a male character.
Yeah, and that's because. But is that because he gets involved heavily in more events directly? That it's just because we just see more of him.
Probably.
Yeah, like it's. Yeah, so I read that, and it was like 5 minutes before you joined. I was just like, "What the fuck?" And then a couple of last things to rattle off that we didn't get a chance to really talk about. We get another parallel between Ungoliant and Shelob is that Ungoliant, as Melkor, is completely non-subservient to him. Shelob is exactly the same with Sauron. I wanted to point out another flaw in this paper where I really didn't enjoy what he said in the second half, where he said that he basically pointed out like all the actually empowered women in the legendarium and said that they were just basically trying to pander to their men. For example, he said that Galadriel was looking to be subservient for her husband, which I thought, that's where he lost me. That was a specific part where he lost me, is when he said that Galadriel was like Eve and was seeking redemption for going beyond her station, seeking power, and that she was trying to humble herself for her husband, which, if there was ever a himbo in Middle-earth, it would be... Celeborn? Galadriel's husband. Yeah, it's Celeborn, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You can even see that in... hang on, my dog's barking. I'll shut her up really quick.
Yeah, if there was ever a himbo, it would be old Teleporno from Galadriel's husband. And that's the part of the paper where this guy completely lost me. And it's just... He also made some arguments that other women like Lobelia Sackville-Bagginses were tied up heavily with the men in their life and central to them. Which Lobelia is an absolute hero by the end of it. He said that she took on an antagonistic role towards Frodo and Bilbo, and that was the crux of her character. But arguably, I think the Scouring of the Shire is where she really comes into her own. And yeah, so that's it, kids. Just because something's in an academic paper doesn't mean it's gospel truth. But yeah, going back to Galadriel though, like.
But like when I read that, I was like, did you read anything about Galadriel? Because even in like the Lord of the Rings, whenever they come into Lothlorien and Celeborn is talking shit as always, and then Galadriel is like, no, actually, and then Celeborn sees the interaction between Gimli and Galadriel after Galadriel uses some Khazad-dûl towards Gimli, and
Celeborn is just like, sorry, and just stumbling over himself.
Yeah, it's just, I was like, no, man, I'm sorry, you lost me there. But like,
Yeah,
but then
even with
Arwen, yeah, sorry.
Oh no, sorry, you go.
Arwen is done dirty. Like Arwen, Eowyn, even Luthien, who was a fucking solid hero in the first age. That is her adventure as essentially a prize that her dad is offering to be won to Beren, or like the fact that Beren, goes to her dad and says, "I want your daughter," and he's like, "Oh, get me a Silmaril and you can have her." And then Arwen being a prize for Aragorn. That is where I think they're done slightly dirty by Tolkien. But
I agree with that part. But then like with Luthien, she goes on to do like this really powerful thing. I think Arwen was more of the one that was cut short with that one.
Yeah, Arwen, for a descendant of Luthien, she was done a bit dirty because she essentially was a prize. It was like, Aragorn, get to the end of the quest and you can have her, and like emphasis on that. You can just have her, and it's just like that's I think is where she failed.
From a feministic standpoint, I can understand that, but then also from a parenting standpoint, I guess, if you know the lore, I would be understanding of it, because if you know what happened to Arwen's mom, then be completely understanding as to why Elrond was like, no, she will not go and do this. You have to become this great thing, or else you will not be worthy of her. I have to know that you can protect her in order for you to have her, because I'm not going to have what happened to her mom happen to her.
Yeah, and I mean, it could be like the ultimate dad move. It's that like, don't be a good man for her. Make the world change around her. Like, make the world safer. Don't you make her safe. Make the world safe for her. Which, arguably. But I think that might be us for today, because that's kind of where the paper goes. I think we've had a really good discussion today. I think we're both settled that Ungoliant and Shelob are some prime examples of, at the time, what might have been seen as unacceptable, but you can see just how it's morphed now, that this is just two feminists having a good time, I guess. And yeah, if you're interested in coming to hang out with us in the Discord server, the links are wherever you find us. We're on our social media platforms with Instagram and Discord as the main ones. And yeah, so it's goodbye from me, Chris.
Thanks for having me. It's been a hoot and a holler getting to talk about this stuff. I don't have a lot of people I get to talk to about this, so whenever I can rattle on, it's so fun.
Yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic. Like I said, it's been lovely to have you on. It's been a really good discussion. Like I said, usually it's the stories and the lore and what have you, but to have an actual discussion about the themes around these things has been really, really good. Just before you go, tell us a little bit about the Voices of Arda. I think you're part of that, right?
Yeah. So the Voices of Arda used to be just like a podcast between New Betta Do Betta and Kaiakayy Cosplay. And then when we all created this fun little Tolkien group, they were like, well, what if we made it a page dedicated to us Tolkien creators? So it's now this big YouTube collaboration where there's my content, there's Miranda's, who is ex-Librishmere on Instagram, and she does the Tolkien Tuesdays. There's Airplane Facts with Max, who everybody loves. There's Belmont, there's Foreignos 42, New Betta Do Betta, Kaiakayy Cosplay, Bladorthin, Kelly, who is the middle page on Instagram, and I don't think I'm missing anybody else. But yeah, it's this really fun YouTube collaboration that we're all doing, that where if you like our content on Instagram or on TikTok, then you can just go onto the Voices of Arda on YouTube, and it's just a playlist of all of our stuff.
Sounds perfect. Right, I'll chuck up a wee link to that as well, a cheeky little link. But I've already said it once, but I think your audio would cut out. Other than that, thank you for coming on. And so it's going to be goodbye from me, Chris.
And bye from
that's
you.
Your cue. Yeah, I was going to say that's your cue to say bye. Okay, right, bye everyone.
Bye.